They were the icons of a golden age, flawless faces, captivating charm, and timeless allure. But behind the velvet curtain of old Hollywood, time marched on, and not kindly. In this video, we're peeling back the glamorous facade to reveal the shocking transformations of 20 legendary stars who the world once worshipped and later barely recognized. Some were victims of tragedy, others of vanity, and a few of their own fame. Stay tuned, because what you're about to see is a haunting reminder that no amount of stardom can stop the clock. Mickey Rourke, the face that fought back. Mickey Rourke wasn't just another handsome face in the crowd. He was the face of cinematic rebellion in the 1980s. With that dangerous smirk, soulful gaze, and raw charisma, Rourke brought something different to the screen. Critics compared him to legends like James Dean and Brando, not just for his looks, but for the emotional fire he brought to every role. In 9.5 weeks in Angel Heart, he burned through the screen. Audiences were hooked. But then, seemingly at the peak of his fame, he walked away. Rourke turned to professional boxing, an unusual move, and one that would come with permanent consequences. Years in the ring left him with facial injuries that required reconstructive surgery. He later admitted he chose the wrong doctors. When he returned to Hollywood, fans were stunned. The chiseled beauty was gone, replaced by a hardened, reconstructed version of the man they once knew. Some whispered about vanity, others about pain. But no matter the cause, the transformation was dramatic and haunting. Yet somehow Rourke reclaimed his art. In The Wrestler, he gave a performance that was raw, broken, and unforgettable. It earned him a Golden Globe, and more importantly, reminded everyone of the talent that was always there. Mickey Rourke didn't just age, he transformed. And his face tells a story no script ever could. Brigitte Bardot. From bombshell to recluse, Brigitte Bardot wasn't just a star, she was a symbol. In the 1950s and 60s, no one embodied sensuality and effortless glamour quite like her. With tousled blonde hair, pouty lips, and a devil-may-care attitude, Bardot lit up the screen and the runway. She became the original French it girl, idolized by women, desired by men, and endlessly chased by the press. But unlike most stars, Bardot didn't chase the spotlight, she ran from it. By the early 1970s, at the height of her fame, Bardot made a decision few could understand. She walked away. Retiring from film at just 39 years old, she vanished from the silver screen and retreated into a life of privacy and activism. While many former starlets pursued cosmetic procedures to preserve their youthful image, Bardot did the opposite. She aged completely on her own terms. The result was shocking for some fans. The sultry siren of "In God Created Woman" became almost unrecognizable. Sun-damaged skin, deep lines, and a defiant lack of makeup marked her later public appearances. But Bardot didn't seem to care. She refused to apologize for growing older and refused to pretend. Today, she lives in the south of France, devoting her life to animal rights, far removed from the glitz of Cannes. To many, her aging was terrible, but to others, it was powerful. Bardot didn't fade. She rebelled against a system that demanded she never change. And in doing so, she rewrote what it means to age in the public eye. Marlon Brando, the godfather of transformation. When Marlon Brando appeared on screen in Streetcar Named Desire, the world stopped. He wasn't just acting, he was living, breathing intensity. His smoldering good looks, raw emotion, and rebellious energy changed Hollywood forever. Brando wasn't just a movie star, he was a revolution in motion. Women adored him, men tried to be him, and directors begged to work with him. But over time, the icon who once redefined masculinity would become nearly unrecognizable. In the early decades of his career, Brando's face was sculpted perfection, sharp cheekbones, piercing eyes, and a magnetic presence that seemed immune to time. But as the years passed, his appearance began to shift. Weight gain, reclusion, and declining health reshaped him into a man few associated with the legend he once was. By the 1990s, the transformation was complete. The Marlon Brando of the island of Dr. Moreau bore little resemblance to the young Stanley Kowalski. Public appearances became rare. When he did surface, his enormous frame, worn features, and labored movements made headlines. It wasn't just aging, it was a dramatic unraveling of an American myth. But even in his later years, Brando never lost his brilliance. His presence, no matter how altered, still commanded attention. He aged far from gracefully, and yet entirely on his own terms. In the end, he remained as enigmatic as ever, a man who changed the face of film, and then, unapologetically, let time change his own. Bette Davis. The eyes had it, until time took its toll. Bette Davis was never your typical Hollywood beauty. She didn't need to be. With her unmistakable voice, razor-sharp wit, and those famously intense eyes, she carved out a place in film history on pure force of talent. From All About Eve to now Voyager, Davis commanded the screen with a kind of unapologetic boldness that few dared to imitate. But even legends aren't immune to time. Davis aged in full view of the public, and she did so while continuing to work relentlessly. But the years weren't kind. Her lifelong smoking habit, multiple health scares, and stress from a fiercely competitive career left their mark. The once vibrant glow dulled. Her features grew sharper, almost severe. The sparkle in those famous eyes dimmed, but never disappeared. By the time she starred in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Davis had already leaned into her aging. She let herself look broken, grotesque even, almost daring audiences to look away. Off-screen, she wore heavy makeup, wigs, and elaborate clothing to maintain some sense of her screen image, but the toll was visible. And she knew it. Still, Bette Davis never pretended to be something she wasn't. She defied the expectations of Hollywood glamour, even as she aged in a world obsessed with youth. Her appearance may have shocked those who remembered her as a young starlet, but her determination? That never aged a day. Davis didn't just survive in the industry, she dominated it all the way to the end. Judy Garland. The voice that carried a world and the weight of it. When Judy Garland sang Over the Rainbow as a wide-eyed Dorothy, she became America's sweetheart overnight. With her angelic voice, expressive eyes, and vulnerable charm, she captured hearts in a way few ever could. But behind that magical screen presence was a young girl thrust into a world she was never prepared for, a world that would leave its mark year after year. Garland's early life in Hollywood was tightly controlled. Her image, her body, even her meals were managed by studio executives who saw her not as a child, but as a product. The pressure to stay thin, work endlessly, and remain camera-ready took a toll early on. And though her talent only grew, her physical appearance began to show the strain. By her 30s, Judy looked older than her age. Dark circles, thinning hair, and deep-set lines became more visible. Her once bright eyes looked tired, haunted. Public appearances often drew gasps, not because of glamour, but because of the contrast between the Judy people remembered and the Judy standing before them. Yet through it all, her voice remained powerful, rich with both beauty and pain. In her final years, Garland seemed like a shadow of her former self, worn down by decades of spotlight and struggle. Still, when she stepped on stage, there was magic. Her physical transformation was dramatic, even heartbreaking, but her emotional depth only deepened. Judy Garland didn't just age in Hollywood, she endured it. And somehow, even in her most fragile moments, she still lit up the room. Montgomery Clift. The beautiful face that time couldn't touch, but fate did. Montgomery Clift was once considered the most beautiful man in Hollywood. With his piercing eyes, sculpted features, and quiet intensity, he brought something rare to the screen. Vulnerability wrapped in matinee idol looks. In classics like A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity, Clift didn't just act, he felt. His performances were raw, internal, almost too real. And for a time, it seemed like nothing could dim that brilliance. But one night in 1956 changed everything. Driving home from co-star Elizabeth Taylor's house, Clift crashed his car into a telephone pole just outside her driveway. His injuries were devastating: broken jaw, nose, cheekbones, and severe facial lacerations. Taylor was first on the scene, pulling his broken teeth from his throat so he wouldn't choke. He survived, but his face and his career were never the same. Post-accident, Clift returned to the screen, but the difference was stark. His once symmetrical features had shifted. His speech became slurred. That youthful light in his eyes dimmed. The studios couldn't hide it, and fans couldn't unsee it. His beauty, once the cornerstone of his appeal, had been altered forever. Yet somehow, his acting only deepened. Performances in The Misfits and Judgment at Nuremberg showed a man fully aware of his mortality and willing to put it all on screen. Clift didn't age so much as he unraveled, piece by piece, in plain sight. And in that unraveling, he became even more human and unforgettable. Elizabeth Taylor, the violet-eyed goddess who refused to fade quietly. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just a movie star, she was a living jewel. With her legendary violet eyes, flawless skin, and magnetic presence, she ruled the silver screen from childhood into adulthood. Whether she was breaking hearts in Cat on a hot tin roof or commanding the screen in Cleopatra, Taylor wasn't just admired, she was worshipped. But living under that kind of pressure, in front of a camera for nearly every year of her life, came at a price. By her 40s, Taylor's appearance began to shift. Years of intense media scrutiny, health complications, and the emotional weight of a very public personal life, 8 marriages, high-profile affairs, constant tabloid attention, began to show. She struggled with fluctuating weight, underwent numerous medical procedures, and became known almost as much for her hospital visits as her film roles. Still, Taylor never hid. Whether she was photographed at her thinnest or her heaviest, in couture gowns or hospital gowns, she faced the flashbulbs head-on. But her aging process was far from smooth. Cosmetic surgery, water retention from medication, and chronic pain all took their toll on her once dazzling features. The woman who once defined beauty now became a symbol of resilience and, at times, excess. And yet, through it all, she never lost her sense of grandeur. Elizabeth Taylor aged with drama, with flair, and with unapologetic glamour. She didn't age like the rest of us. She did it on a red carpet, under a microscope, and still managed to be unforgettable until the very end. Joan Crawford, the star who sculpted her own legend and her face. Joan Crawford didn't just rise to fame, she willed herself into it. From silent films to the golden age of Hollywood, she reinvented herself time and again. A chorus girl turned flapper, then a leading lady, and finally, a fiercely commanding screen presence. With her sharp cheekbones, intense stare, and meticulously crafted image, Crawford came to represent a kind of impossible glamour, regal, untouchable, and immaculately styled. But keeping up that illusion was a lifelong battle. Crawford was obsessed with control over her career, her body, and most visibly her appearance. She was known to tape her face behind her hairline, sleep with ice packs, and undergo extensive cosmetic treatments to maintain her youthful look. And for a while it worked. Even into her 50s, she played romantic leads opposite younger men, defying age and expectation. But eventually time caught up. By the 1960s, Crawford's look began to harden. Her features became exaggerated. Arched eyebrows, deep red lips, and severe makeup created an image that felt more mannequin than woman. Off-screen, the aging process was even more evident. The surgeries, makeup, and lighting tricks that once hid her years could no longer compete with reality. The contrast between her golden age beauty and her later public appearances was striking, sometimes even unsettling. Yet Crawford never gave up control. She stepped out of the spotlight on her own terms, famously refusing to be photographed in her final years. For some, her aging seemed tragic. For others, it was simply the final act of a woman who spent her entire life commanding how the world saw her, even if it meant hiding in the end. Ava Gardner, the beauty that time couldn't bless. Ava Gardner was once hailed as the most beautiful woman in the world. With her smoldering eyes, flawless skin, and effortless allure, she didn't just light up the screen, she burned through it. Men across the globe were captivated, and Hollywood couldn't get enough. In films like The Killers and Magambo, Gardner's sensuality was both elegant and dangerous, a perfect storm of old-school glamour and untamed spirit. But behind that beauty was a woman living a wild, passionate life, and eventually it showed. Gardner was never one for rules. She smoked, drank, stayed out all night, and loved fiercely, most famously her volatile marriage to Frank Sinatra. She lived fully, but not gently. As the years passed, the signs of that lifestyle began to etch themselves onto her face. Wrinkles came early. Her skin lost its glow. Her once enviable figure changed with age and time. But perhaps what shocked fans most was that she didn't try to hide it. In a town obsessed with illusion, Gardner aged honestly. She didn't lean on surgery or elaborate disguises. Instead, she stepped back from Hollywood and moved to London and later Spain, away from the cameras, away from the noise. But when she did appear in public, the contrast to her cinematic heyday was striking. The woman who once defined beauty now looked like someone who had lived 1,000 lives and paid for every one of them. Still, there was a quiet dignity in her transformation. Ava Gardner didn't cling to the spotlight, she let it fade. And in doing so, she reminded the world that beauty, no matter how iconic, is never built to last, but grace, even in aging, can be just as powerful. Orson Welles, the boy wonder who outgrew the spotlight. Orson Welles changed cinema forever before he turned 26. Citizen Kane wasn't just a film, it was a revolution, and Welles was its brilliant, unstoppable architect. With his deep voice, commanding presence, and daring vision, he was hailed as a prodigy, a genius, a force of nature. In those early years, he had it all: charm, intellect, ambition, and striking good looks. But as the decades passed, Wells transformed in ways even he couldn't direct. In his prime, Wells had a bold, refined handsomeness, thick dark hair, piercing eyes, and a screen presence that demanded attention. But after Hollywood turned its back on him, Wells turned inward. He shifted from a spotlight to more obscure, often unfinished projects. As he moved further from the mainstream, his physical transformation accelerated. He gained weight, a lot of it. By the 1970s and 80s, Wells was almost unrecognizable compared to his youthful self. His once trim figure ballooned, his face became heavy and bloated, and even simple movement seemed difficult in public appearances. Still, his voice remained thunderous, and his mind razor-sharp, but his appearance shocked fans who remembered the dashing young man behind Kane. Wells made no apologies. He leaned into his persona as an eccentric genius, puffing cigars, giving grand interviews, and continuing to work until his final days. But the contrast between who he was and who he became is one of Hollywood's most dramatic physical evolutions. Orson Welles didn't just age. He expanded, unraveled, and ascended into myth, leaving behind a body of work as colossal as the man himself. Peter Lorre, the unforgettable eyes that slowly dimmed. Peter Lorre wasn't conventionally handsome, but he was unforgettable. With his wide, haunting eyes and soft, accented voice, Lorre brought a strange, magnetic presence to every role he touched. In films like M, The Maltese Falcon, and Casablanca, he played creeps, criminals, and tortured souls better than anyone. He didn't need glamour, he had atmosphere. But that unique look, so vital to his fame, would betray him as time moved on. Lorre was often typecast. His unusual features made him perfect for villains, outsiders, and characters on the edge. But the pressure of staying in demand, along with years of personal struggles and poor health, began to wear him down. His boyish round face became heavier. His skin lost color, his eyes, once so striking, began to look tired, almost sad. By the 1950s, Lorre's appearance had aged rapidly. He looked far older than his actual years. Weight gain and illness, along with the toll of being perpetually cast in sinister roles, shaped a man who seemed weathered by both the industry and life itself. The Peter Lorre of later years still had that iconic voice and eerie charm, but visually, he had drifted far from the actor who once chilled audiences with a whisper. He never underwent cosmetic procedures, never tried to maintain an illusion. He aged as he lived, quietly and in shadows. For fans who remembered him at his most enigmatic, the change was hard to miss. And yet, even in decline, Peter Lorre's presence lingered, odd, mournful, and utterly impossible to forget. Tallulah Bankhead. The voice, the vices, the vanishing glamour. Tallulah Bankhead was a force, a whirlwind of wit, scandal, and unapologetic excess. With a smoky voice that could cut glass and personality too big for any stage or screen, she didn't just break the rules, she was a rule breaker. In the 1930s and 40s, Bankhead captivated audiences with her sultry allure and razor-sharp delivery. Off-screen, she was the life of every party. But as the years wore on, the woman who once dazzled Hollywood began to unravel in front of it. Bankhead's appearance in her prime was striking: sharp cheekbones, expressive eyes, and an electrifying presence. She carried herself like royalty, if royalty had a whiskey in one hand and a cigarette in the other. But her lifestyle caught up with her fast. Heavy smoking, constant drinking, sleepless nights, and emotional turmoil began to erode her once vibrant look. By her 50s, the signs were undeniable. Her face was gaunt, her skin weathered, her voice, once seductive, now raspy to the point of cracking. She looked far older than her age, and while she never tried to hide it, her transformation shocked those who remembered the magnetic woman of earlier years. She still performed, still shocked, still held court, but her body bore the cost of living in high gear for too long. Tallulah Bankhead aged the way she lived, loudly, messily, and without apology. She burned bright, burned fast, and left behind a legacy not of beauty preserved, but of defiance etched into every line on her face. Dean Martin, the king of cool, fading behind the smoke. Dean Martin was the embodiment of effortless charm. Crooner, comedian, actor, and Rat Pack royalty, he made everything look easy. With a drink in one hand, a wink at his eye, and that velvety baritone voice, Martin floated through the golden age of Hollywood like a man untouched by stress. Women adored him. Men wanted to be him. He was class without trying, cool without effort. But as the spotlight lingered, so did the years, and Dean's famous swagger slowly gave way to something more fragile. In his heyday, Martin was the picture of laid-back glamour. Impeccably dressed, eternally tanned, and always flashing that crooked smile. But behind the scenes, the party lifestyle wasn't just for show. Cigarettes, booze, and long nights were part of the routine. Over time, that lifestyle carved itself into his appearance. By the 1970s and 80s, Martin's look had shifted dramatically. His once youthful face began to sag, his skin thinned, and his eyes took on a tired, glassy quality. His voice grew hoarse, and that easy confidence looked heavier, more rehearsed than real. The death of his son in 1987 hit him hard, and many say he was never the same afterward. He withdrew, rarely seen in public, and seemed to age almost overnight. Dean Martin didn't age tragically, he aged quietly. But for those who remembered the king of the cool cats, the change was profound. The sparkle dimmed, the charm slowed, and the man who once lit up every room simply faded into the background, one slow, smoky breath at a time. Errol Flynn, the pirate who couldn't outrun the storm. Errol Flynn was the ultimate screen adventurer. With a sword in his hand and a grin on his face, he swung from chandeliers, rescued damsels, and defined the word dashing. In classics like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, he wasn't just acting, he was the fantasy. Handsome, athletic, and oozing charisma, Flynn ruled the 1930s and 40s with an energy that felt larger than life. But the man behind the myth lived fast, too fast, and it showed. Flynn's off-screen life was as wild as any of his films. He drank heavily, partied endlessly, and chased every indulgence fame could offer. At first, it only added to his mystique. But by the time he reached his 40s, the cracks began to show. His once perfect features grew puffy, his skin lost its youthful glow, and the glint in his eyes dulled under the weight of years lived in overdrive. By his early 50s, Flynn looked decades older. His once athletic build had softened, his face bloated by alcohol and exhaustion. The energetic hero of the silver screen was now slow-moving, raspy, and visibly worn down. Fans who idolized his youthful image were stunned by his rapid transformation. The pirate had aged, and not well. Errol Flynn didn't fade gracefully. He burned until there was nothing left. His decline was a crash as dramatic as his rise. And in the end, his aging became part of a legend, a golden god of Hollywood who lived like no one else, and paid the price with every passing year. Barbara Payton, from starlet to shadows. Barbara Payton was once a rising star with the kind of beauty that could stop traffic, and often did. With platinum blonde hair, sultry eyes, and a devil-may-care attitude, she was seen as the next big thing in Hollywood. In films like Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye alongside James Cagney, she lit up the screen with promise. But behind that bombshell exterior was a woman caught between stardom, scandal, and self-destruction, and her transformation became one of the most shocking Hollywood ever witnessed. At first, Payton had it all: studio contracts, magazine covers, high-profile romances. But her personal life quickly began to eclipse her work. A tumultuous love triangle between two actors, one violent, one volatile, turned her into tabloid fodder. Offers slowed. Her once flawless appearance started to change. The sparkle in her eyes faded, replaced by exhaustion and instability. By the early 1950s, her career had stalled and her lifestyle spiraled. She was still young, still beautiful, but the wear was already showing. Her face grew puffy, her expression haunted. The glow was gone. By the end of the decade, she was no longer recognizable as the glamorous starlet who once walked red carpets. Instead, she was drifting, often homeless, often in trouble, and visibly aged beyond her years. Barbara Payton's decline wasn't just physical, it was deeply public. The photographs tell a painful story of a woman who flew too close to the spotlight, then was left to wander in its shadow. She aged not only quickly but tragically, her face becoming a symbol of what Hollywood gives and what it can take away. Anthony Perkins, the boy next door who never escaped the basement. Anthony Perkins was the kind of handsome that made Hollywood take notice. Tall, lean, with shy eyes and a nervous charm that made him magnetic. Early in his career, he was cast as the sensitive heartthrob, a rising star who seemed destined for leading man status. But then came Psycho. His portrayal of Norman Bates was so chilling, so iconic, that it changed everything, including how the world saw him. Perkins never truly escaped that role. Though he continued to act in film and on stage, the shadow of Bates loomed large. Over time, his on-screen presence became more withdrawn, his looks more angular, almost gaunt. The fresh-faced innocence of his youth gave way to something more fragile. The pressure of fame, the isolation of typecasting, and the burden of keeping his personal life tightly guarded all began to show on his face. In his later years, Perkins looked tired. His skin had grown pale, his eyes sunken. The nervous energy that once made him irresistible now read as haunted. He aged quietly, out of the spotlight for long stretches, choosing privacy over fame. But when he did reappear, fans were startled by the transformation. The once boyish actor looked weary, far older than his years. There was no scandalous collapse, no public unraveling, just a gradual, painful fading of a man who had once captivated the world. Anthony Perkins aged not through spectacle, but through slow erosion, his face becoming a ghost of the bright promise that once defined him. Greta Garbo, the face that vanished. Greta Garbo wasn't just a star, she was a myth. With her sculpted features, heavy-lidded eyes, and an aura of mystery no studio could manufacture, she dominated silent films and early talkies like few ever have. Critics called her otherworldly. Audiences were obsessed. She captivated not just with her beauty, but with her silence. And then, at the peak of her fame, she disappeared. In 1941, Garbo retired from acting at age 36. No fanfare, no farewell film, just gone. For the next 5 decades, she lived privately, mostly in New York, refusing interviews, declining appearances, and avoiding cameras. She became the subject of endless speculation. What did she look like now? Had she aged? Did she still resemble the mysterious goddess who once mesmerized the world? When paparazzi did catch her in later years, the images were shocking to many. Garbo had aged naturally, without cosmetic intervention or glamorized pretense. Her face was heavily lined, her frame more stooped. She wore simple clothes, often sunglasses, and no makeup. She looked human. The contrast between the shimmering star of the 1930s and the reclusive older woman was jarring to those who remembered her frozen in cinematic perfection. But to Garbo, privacy was power. She refused to participate in Hollywood's illusion of eternal youth. She aged far from the limelight on her own terms. While many say she aged poorly, perhaps what truly startled people was that she aged at all. Greta Garbo was a goddess who chose to walk among mortals, and time, as always, made its mark. Hedy Lamarr, the inventor trapped in a movie star's face. Hedy Lamarr was often described as the most beautiful woman to ever appear on film. With her flawless features, striking bone structure, and deep, intelligent eyes, she became the very image of exotic allure in the 1930s and 40s. But Lamarr was more than a screen siren, she was a genius. A self-taught inventor whose work would one day influence modern Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Yet in the eyes of Hollywood, her value was pinned entirely to her face. And that face, inevitably, would change. As the roles grew fewer, Lamarr became increasingly concerned with her appearance. Aging, for someone so universally known for her beauty, wasn't just uncomfortable, it was terrifying. She underwent a series of cosmetic procedures, hoping to preserve the image the world adored. But the surgeries weren't always successful. Her once ethereal beauty began to take on a stretched, artificial quality that saddened many of her longtime admirers. By the 1970s, Lamarr had withdrawn from public life almost entirely. Rare sightings revealed a woman transformed, her features altered, her eyes hollowed by both time and solitude. The vibrant actress of Samson and Delilah was nearly unrecognizable. And yet behind closed doors, her mind remained sharp, always tinkering, always dreaming. Hedy Lamarr didn't just age, she struggled with aging. Not because of vanity, but because she had been imprisoned by her own image for so long. In the end, her brilliance outlasted her beauty, but her physical transformation remains one of Hollywood's most quietly tragic stories. Linda Darnell, the angel-faced starlet burned by her own spotlight. Linda Darnell was often called too beautiful to be taken seriously, a compliment that quickly turned into a curse. With dark, luminous eyes and delicate, almost ethereal features, she was a vision on screen in the 1940s, starring in films like Forever Amber and A Letter to Three Wives. She had a soft, regal elegance that felt effortless. But behind the glow of the studio lights was a woman whose life would slowly unravel and whose physical transformation mirrored her fading fortunes. In her prime, Darnell seemed untouchable. But as she grew older, the roles dried up. Typecast for her beauty, she found herself struggling to transition into more mature parts. The pressure to maintain her appearance intensified. She dealt with weight fluctuations, declining health, and constant anxiety about her image. The Hollywood system that once praised her looks began to discard her the moment they changed. By her late 30s and early 40s, Darnell looked far older than her years. The stress etched itself onto her face, wrinkles, puffiness, and fatigue replacing the soft elegance of her youth. Her once delicate features became harsher, her expression more guarded. And then, in a cruel twist of fate, tragedy struck. A fire, sparked in a house where she was staying, left her with severe burns. The woman who had once been celebrated for her flawless face was left physically scarred, both inside and out. Linda Darnell's transformation wasn't just about aging, it was about what happens when a person is valued only for how they look. Her beauty may have opened the door, but also trapped her inside. And when it faded, Hollywood closed that door for good. Veronica Lake, the peekaboo starlet who disappeared behind the curtain. Veronica Lake was a phenomenon. With her signature peekaboo hairstyle, icy blonde waves, and cool, mysterious gaze, she redefined Hollywood glamour in the 1940s. Films like Sullivan's Travels and This Gun for Hire made her an icon almost overnight. She wasn't just beautiful, she was unique, with a presence that felt otherworldly. But fame came fast and faded even faster. Behind the scenes, Lake struggled. Studios found her difficult, co-stars complained of her attitude, and her roles began to dry up before she was even 30. As the industry moved on, she found herself out of work, out of favor, and increasingly unstable. Her physical transformation came not from a slow march of time, but from the harsh sting of rejection and survival. By the 1950s and 60s, Lake's glamorous image had all but vanished. She gained weight, suffered through alcoholism, and was photographed working as a cocktail waitress, far from the spotlight that once adored her. The delicate bone structure and polished style were gone, replaced by a tired, bloated face that fans barely recognized. To the public, the change was shocking. One of Hollywood's most striking beauties, now struggling just to get by. Veronica Lake didn't just age, she vanished in plain sight. Her transformation was a stark reminder of how brutal the film industry can be to women who age out of their type. But even as the world forgot her, she never completely gave up. She wrote a memoir, tried to return to acting, and kept a sharp tongue to the very end. Her beauty may have faded, but her defiance never did. They were icons, faces that lit up the golden age of Hollywood, symbols of beauty, talent, and charisma. But as we've seen, even legends are not immune to time, pressure, or pain. Behind the glamour and the fame were real people, flawed, vulnerable, and often forgotten by the very industry that built them up. Aging in Hollywood isn't just a physical process, it's emotional, brutal, and sometimes heartbreaking. And while some stars faded quietly, others fought every step of the way. Their transformations remind us of how fleeting fame can be, and how human even the most untouchable stars really are. If this journey through old Hollywood moved you, surprised you, or made you see these legends in a new light, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We've got more untold stories, more hidden history, and more deep dives into the faces and lives behind the camera. Thanks for watching, and remember, every star has its rise and its fall.